Good evening, ladies and emperors. I just got back from Venice, and boy, are my arms tired.
Mel Brooks is 98 years old now, and he has nothing left to hide. After decades of making some of the funniest movies in Hollywood history, he finally decided to share something nobody expected, a list of 6 actors he says he hated working with. But if you know Mel Brooks, even a little, you already know that when he says hate, he doesn't quite mean it the way most people do. His version of hate is wrapped in laughter, soaked in affection, and built on years of wild, messy, unforgettable experiences behind the camera. This isn't a story about bad people or ruined friendships. It's a story about what happens when incredibly talented, incredibly stubborn, incredibly passionate people are put together in a room and told to make something funny. And honestly, the results are some of the greatest comedies ever made. If you enjoy stories about Hollywood legends and what really happens behind the scenes of your favorite classic films, you're gonna love this one. Make sure you subscribe and hit the like button so you never miss stories like this. Now let's get into it. The first name on Mel Brooks's list is Dom DeLuise, and the reason might genuinely surprise you. It had nothing to do with attitude, nothing to do with ego or being difficult in the traditional sense. Dom DeLuise's problem was much simpler, and in some ways, much worse. The man simply could not stop laughing, and not just a quiet chuckle he could push through. We're talking full, gasping, face-covering, body-shaking laughter that would erupt out of nowhere and completely destroy a take before it even had a chance to get going. Dom and Mel worked together on several films over the years, including Silent Movie, History of the World Part 1, Spaceballs, and Robin Hood Men in Tights, and in every single one of them, the pattern was exactly the same. Mel would call action, Dom would try to hold it together, and then something would happen. Maybe someone raised an eyebrow at the wrong moment, maybe a fellow actor delivered a line in a slightly unexpected way, and that was it. Dom was gone, lost to laughter. The take was ruined, the crew had to wait, and the whole thing would start all over again. What made it even more remarkable was that Dom wasn't usually laughing at himself, he was laughing at everyone around him. Put him next to Madeline Kahn or Harvey Korman, and it was basically hopeless. One look between them was enough to set him off completely. Mel once described a scene from History of the World Part 1 where Dom had just a single line to deliver, one line, but the moment Madeline reacted to him, Dom collapsed into laughter for 45 straight minutes. The entire crew just had to stand there and wait. Mel tried everything to manage the situation. He rearranged scenes so Dom wouldn't have to face the other actors directly. He tried keeping cameras off Dom as much as possible just to get a usable shot. Nothing really worked. But here's the thing, and this is what makes the story so good. When Dom finally held himself together long enough to deliver a take, it was almost always brilliant. His timing was perfect, his energy lit up the screen, the performance was everything Mel wanted and more, so he couldn't fire him. He couldn't even really stay angry at him, because the moment they got a clean take, it was obvious exactly why Dom was there. Off camera, Dom was one of the warmest people on any set. He would bring food for the crew, cook pasta, treat everyone like family. He was generous and kind and genuinely loved by everyone around him. Mel never stopped joking about how impossible he was to direct, but it was always said with a big smile. When Mel puts Dom on his hate list, what he really means is that Dom drove him absolutely crazy in the best possible way, and he misses him deeply. The second name is Madeline Kahn, and if Dom DeLuise was difficult because he laughed too much, Madeline was difficult for the exact opposite reason. She was too serious about the work, too meticulous, too unwilling to just follow directions and move on. She appeared in some of Mel Brooks's most beloved films, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1, and in every single one of them, her performances were jaw-dropping. But getting to those performances was never a simple or smooth process. Madeline didn't just learn her lines and show up, she questioned everything. She would read a script and push back on lines that didn't feel right to her. She would arrive on set and raise concerns about costumes, about staging, about the way a scene was set up. If she thought something could be better, she said so, clearly and directly, without apology.
The crew would be ready to shoot, cameras in position, everyone waiting, and Madeline would walk in calm as anything, as if time was not a factor that applied to her. Mel found it endlessly frustrating. And then she would step in front of the camera and deliver something so good that all the frustration just evaporated. Her role as Lily Von Stupp in Blazing Saddles became one of the most quoted and celebrated performances in comedy history, but filming those scenes meant constant back and forth. She would change the delivery of a line, she would suggest adjustments for other actors, she would ask for more takes and different camera angles. Mel once said that directing her felt less like being in charge and more like trying to keep up with someone who was always 3 steps ahead of him. She once told him, very calmly, that she had found a better way to deliver a line he'd asked her to do in a specific manner. And the maddening part, as Mel later admitted, was that she was usually right.
The same dynamic played out in Young Frankenstein, where she pushed for more takes, debated lighting choices, and made every scene take twice as long to shoot. Mel joked that directing her was like trying to wrestle a cat in a rainstorm, and yet he kept casting her, film after film, because whatever she brought to the screen was impossible to replicate. There was a specific quality to her voice, her timing, her expressions, that made every scene richer and funnier and more human. She once pushed for a change as small as the couch her character sat on, and Mel later admitted that even that tiny detail ended up improving the scene. He named her on his hate list not out of dislike, but out of a particular kind of exhausted admiration. She made everything harder and everything better, and that combination is a rare and frustrating thing to encounter in any creative partnership. Third on the list is Gene Hackman, and this one is a little different from the others. Their collaboration was brief, just a single scene in Young Frankenstein where Hackman played the blind hermit in what became one of the film's most beloved and funny moments. But even in that short time together, the clash was noticeable, not because of any personal conflict, but because the two men operated in completely different worlds when it came to how they approached their work. Hackman was already a decorated, serious, dramatic actor when he came onto the set. He had worked on films where precision and discipline were everything, and he brought that same intensity to this small comedic role. He prepared carefully. He wanted structure and clarity. He expected everyone around him to operate at the same level of focused professionalism. That was simply how he worked, and it was a perfectly reasonable way to work, just not particularly compatible with Mel Brooks's preferred style of filmmaking. Mel thrived on looseness. He liked unpredictability. He believed that some of the best comedic moments came from actors discovering things in the moment, from the chaos of a set that was allowed to breathe and surprise itself. So when Hackman wanted more rehearsals, more controlled takes, more consistency from shot to shot, it slowed things down in a way that felt unnatural to Mel. While the rest of the cast was joking around between takes and keeping the energy light and playful, Hackman stayed focused and quiet, completely in character, even during the breaks. Mel described it as trying to play jazz with someone reading from a textbook. The rhythms simply didn't match. Every time a take got ruined because someone in the cast broke into laughter, Hackman would give a look that said, without a single word, that he didn't understand why grown professionals were unable to stay focused. It wasn't hostility, it was just a fundamentally different perspective on what a film set should feel like. Despite all of that, the scene turned out beautifully. Hackman's performance was warm, physical, perfectly timed, and audiences loved it. Mel fully acknowledged that even a difficult process produced something wonderful, but they never worked together again. Their styles were simply too different to make a long-term collaboration practical. They both understood that, and there was mutual respect beneath the incompatibility. Number 4 is Cloris Leachman, and Mel Brooks described her as one of the finest actors he had ever encountered in his life. Genuinely brilliant, fearless, emotionally deep, and completely unwilling to do anything she didn't fully believe in. They worked together on Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1, and in every case, she was extraordinary on screen. And in every case, getting her there put Mel through the ringer. Cloris did not take direction passively. She questioned it. She wanted to understand the reasoning behind every choice, every movement, every line reading. When Mel gave her a note, she would ask why, and she wouldn't accept a vague answer. She wanted to go deep into the character's motivations, to explore the emotional logic of every moment before she was willing to commit to it. Mel once joked that working with her felt like every scene was a college debate. She needed to examine every feeling, every motivation, even the meaning behind a single glance across the room. Her role as Frau Blucher in Young Frankenstein is one of the most memorable performances in any Mel Brooks film. The stare, the voice, the delivery of every line, all of it was iconic. But Cloris had a very different vision for the character than Mel did. She wanted it darker and more grounded. He wanted it strange, funny, a little absurd. They argued about it constantly, not in explosions of temper, but in a steady, persistent friction that never quite went away. Mel said she had a particular look, a long, silent, unwavering stare that she would hold until he either gave in or found a way to convince her. Sometimes he gave in, sometimes he stood firm, but almost always the scene that came out of that process was sharper and stronger than it would have been otherwise. She exhausted him completely. After a full day of working with Cloris, he said he had nothing left, but he kept casting her because she never failed to deliver something remarkable. He didn't hate her, he hated how often she was right.
Fifth is Richard Pryor, and this entry on the list is more complicated and more emotional than the others. Richard wasn't just someone Mel worked with, he was someone Mel believed in completely. When Blazing Saddles was being developed, Richard was Mel's first and only choice to play the lead role of Bart, the black sheriff who turns a racist town upside down with intelligence and humor and absolute confidence. Mel didn't just want Richard for the role, he wrote the role with Richard specifically in mind. Richard also helped write the film. He sat in the writing room with Mel and the rest of the team and contributed some of the sharpest, most daring material in the script. His perspective shaped the film's boldest moments. His voice gave the satire its teeth. Mel was completely convinced that Richard was the heart of the whole project, and he fought hard to make it happen. But the studio refused. They pointed to Richard's reputation for unpredictability, his missed meetings, his inconsistent behavior, his personal struggles. They didn't believe they could trust him to carry a major production, and ultimately they would not approve him for the role. Mel pushed back as hard as he could. He argued that Richard's genius outweighed the risk. He lost. Cleavon Little was cast instead and delivered a fantastic performance that made the role entirely his own. Mel never said a negative word about Cleavon, but he never stopped wondering what might have been, because Richard had something in him, a wild and electric and genuinely unpredictable energy that Mel believed no one else could replicate. The truth was that Richard really was difficult to rely on during the writing process. There were days when he arrived overflowing with ideas, sharper and funnier than anyone in the room, and there were days when he didn't arrive at all. Mel once described working with him as waiting for lightning. You couldn't control it, couldn't predict it, but when it struck, it was completely unforgettable. After the film, they remained friends. Richard understood the decision, even if it hurt, and Mel always saw Richard as a true artist, someone whose gifts were matched only by the difficulty of the life he was living. The final name on the list is Anne Bancroft, and Mel Brooks always said that the hardest actor he ever worked with was also the one he loved the most, his wife of more than 40 years. They came together as co-stars on the film To Be or Not to Be, a remake of the 1942 wartime comedy blending humor and drama and political tension. Mel produced it and starred in it. Anne took the female lead, and the experience of working together, really working together as professional collaborators on the same project, turned out to be one of the most intense creative experiences of Mel's life. Anne did not treat Mel differently because he was her husband. On set, he was the director and she was the actress, and she expected that relationship to earn her respect through clarity and intelligence, not through the convenience of marriage. If a line didn't feel right to her, she said so directly. If a scene seemed off, she challenged it. She never let anything slide. Mel once described a look she would give him when his direction wasn't clear enough. She would stop, raise an eyebrow, and ask what emotion he was going for, then stand with her arms crossed and wait for an actual answer. He admitted she intimidated him, not in a cruel way, but in the way of someone whose instincts are so sharp that you feel them cutting through everything you thought you knew. Their disagreements were frequent and intense, though never explosive. The crew learned to quietly step back when those moments happened and let them find their way through it, and they always did.
because underneath the friction was a deep trust and a shared commitment to making the film the best it could possibly be. Anne brought something to every scene that lifted the whole film. Her timing, her emotional honesty, her ability to find truth even in the most absurd moments made the comedy land harder and the drama land deeper. Offset, they left it all behind. He would make her tea, she would ask about his day. They were just husband and wife again. But the moment they stepped back on set, the whole dynamic returned. Mel said she was the most difficult actress he had ever directed. He also said she was the most brilliant and the only person who could undo him completely with a single sentence. She didn't challenge him to be difficult. She challenged him because she genuinely wanted the film to be great, and so did he, and that shared purpose was worth every argument they ever had. When Mel Brooks says he hated working with these 6 people, he is being honest in his own particular way. It is not real hate. It is the specific frustration that comes from spending years alongside people so talented, so passionate, and so certain of their own instincts that they push you past every comfortable limit you thought you had. Dom DeLuise made him lose takes. Madeline Kahn made him lose arguments. Cleveland Leachman made him lose sleep. Gene Hackman made him lose his spontaneity. Richard Pryor made him lose a role he had written for him. And Anne Bancroft made him lose every single debate they ever had on set. But what he gained from each of them was something that cannot be manufactured or faked. Great comedy, lasting performances, films that people are still watching and quoting and loving decades later. These weren't battles between enemies. They were the growing pains of genuine creative partnership at its most demanding and its most rewarding. Mel didn't hate these people. He was shaped by them. And that, in the end, is the highest compliment a filmmaker can pay to anyone who ever stood in front of his camera.